This video will show you how to replace the front lower control arm on a GMC Sierra 2500. This will be located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we have to do is safely raise and support the front end of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Once you've done that, if you have a hubcap, we're going to remove that. That can be done using a 22mm socket. After that, we'll remove all 8 of our 22mm lug nuts as well so we can remove the wheel. Now that we have the wheel off, let's have a close look in the center area here. We have a metal cover. We're going to dislodge this so we can make our way behind to our axle nut. For this, I'm just using a small hammerable pry bar. I want to make my way in between this area so I can separate it. There's our cover. Just a quick inspection of that. We'll set it aside. We're using a 36mm for our axle nut. There's that. Once you have removed the nut and its washer, continue on with a hammer and punch directly in the center of the front axle. I've used some penetrant to help break this free. Now once you do have movement from the axle in comparison to the wheel bearing, we'll continue on. Now up along the top of the knuckle, this is where we can see our ABS wheel speed sensor wire from the wheel bearing, and this is leading all the way up across the top of the upper control arm, and you're going to find it makes its way behind the front wheel well. Up along the top of the frame is where you're going to find an electrical connector. We're going to carefully dislodge it, then we're going to have to separate the electrical connector from the frame and continue on down along this way. Now as I make my way up and along the top of the frame here, I can feel where my electrical connector is. I'm just carefully pulling up on my locking tab and I'm pressing the wiring harness away. Of course, a quick inspection along each end for corrosion is extremely important. Continuing on, we're going to separate the connector from the frame next. Gently pry it up and out of the frame. Now sometimes the mounting point will break off, that's okay. We can try to remove that or use a wire tie as necessary. As we make our way down, we have another mounting point. Pry that out of place as well. Let's continue making our way outward up along the top of the control arm. We have another mounting point. I'm just going to use a small flat blade screwdriver for this. The locking tab is inside of this area, so I'm using a small screwdriver. We're just going to make our way in, gently pry to separate that. Inspection of that. This is looking good. Now we're just going to pry this off of this metal bracket. Let's set this cable aside. Right in the same area, we're going to dislodge the bracket, which is part of our brake flex hose. We have a 10mm mounting bolt. Quick inspection of that. Now the next thing we want to do is start removing our caliper from this area. If you are looking along the back side of the caliper, you're going to find that you have 2 bolts holding the caliper bracket to the knuckle. We're going to be using a 21mm for each of these. As for these bolts, let's fully remove the upper one. Just give it a quick inspection and start it back in a couple threads. With that started in a couple threads, we can fully remove the next mounting bolt. Now we're holding onto the caliper as we remove that mounting bolt. We should be able to slide this away from our brake rotor. Once you do have it pulled away from the brake rotor, pay attention to the brake pads, making sure they are still in good usable order. We're going to hang this aside, putting no pressure on our flex hose. Let's remove that brake rotor next. At this point, let's focus along the forward side of the steering knuckle. This is where we can see where our outer tie rod end connects to the knuckle. held in place with a 21mm mounting nut. Go ahead and remove that nut, just a quick inspection, start it back on a couple threads. With the nut still in place but loose and penetrant, we're going to be tapping on the steering knuckle. We need to cause vibration, and the outer tie rod end should drop down. Just a quick inspection of that tie rod end. We're going to set that aside. At this point, we can pivot this as necessary. Now, after dislodging the outer tie rod end, let's make our way to the upper ball joint next. I'm using an 18mm for my mounting nut. Typically, you're going to find that the threaded area on the ball joint stud may be rusted. We'll use a wire brush on the threaded area here first. Now, as you can tell, the ball joint nut is starting to come down. This is exactly what we're looking for here. Once it's fully loosened, go ahead and remove it. Just a quick inspection. We're going to start this back on, just a couple threads here. Let's make our way all the way down to the lower ball joint next. Now, down along this area, I'm going to be using a 24mm socket to remove my mounting nut. Now we can start this mounting nut on as well, just a couple threads here. At this point, we have both of our ball joint nuts loosely in place. We're back up along the upper ball joint area. Now what we need to do is separate the ball joint stud from our steering knuckle. You don't want to use a pickle fork in this area, which could potentially damage the ball joint or the boot itself. To separate this, if you have a ball joint separator, you can use that, or just continue on with your hammer. We're going to tap on the knuckle in this area, causing vibration, just like with the tie rod end, and that should want to drop down and separate. Now we're pulling down on the upper control arm so we can remove our upper ball joint nut. We're holding onto the knuckle and the control arm. We should be able to pivot these to separate them. So as we pivot this around, we want to rock it to a position that we can gain access to the lower portion of the knuckle. Now once again, we're going to cause vibration in this area. You're going to find the knuckle drops down. You need to make sure you have this mounting nut loosely in place. Otherwise, this could potentially fall and hurt you. Okay, so I can see this has broken free. As you start lifting this up to remove the nut, just keep in mind it's going to be a little heavy. Try not to hurt yourself here. Now we're going to have to start pulling this down and pulling it away. We need to remove the axle from this area at the same time as the ball joint. We're going to continue on to removing our front sway bar link next. As far as the sway bar link, you're going to be making your way underneath the front lower control arm. This is where you're going to find the head of the sway bar link, and the shaft leads all the way up through this area here. This is just an outer sheathing. Makes its way through the bushings, through that sway bar, and then all the way up to this area. As for the removal of the sway bar link, we'll be using a 15mm for both sides. Now this is something that's extremely common with these sway bar links. Typically moisture will sit inside of them and rust and rot it. It's going to be weak. Ours broke, so let's continue on the removal process. This sway bar link will have to be replaced. We should be able to take hold of this. Once you have it broken free, we'll pull the bottom side away so we can have this at an angle. There we are. Slide it right out of there. Now we are replacing the lower control arm, so we don't have to clean and inspect here, but of course we do want to make sure that the sway bar itself is in good usable order. Just make sure it's not rotted. Now as we move to the rearward side of the lower control arm, we're going to start removing the lower portion of our front shock from this area. We're using a 21mm for the hardware. Before we can remove this mounting bolt, you're going to find that it's under pressure, so we have to carefully apply upward pressure on the lower control arm. releasing pressure from this mounting bolt. After that, we can carefully start lowering this control arm down to the resting position. Now let's move a little further inboard and we can see where the flange of our front axle is. We're going to remove the front axle from this area so we can eventually remove the torsion bar from the lower control arm. Now this axle is held in place with several 16mm mounting bolts. Let's go ahead and remove all of those. Just going to start this one in a couple threads here. You can see it is separating. We'll make sure we hold on to the axle while we remove our final mounting bolts here. Remove the axle, set it aside. With the axle out of position, let's have a look at this area here. Now this is where we can see where our control arm is, and we have the outer portion or the forward portion of our torsion bar. We want to make a clear marking on this torsion bar so we know the orientation of it for the installation process. For this, I'm just using a yellow crayon. You can use anything you have that will make a clear marking. Now that we've made a clear marking here, let's follow the torsion bar rearward. As we make our way back along that torsion bar, we can see where the crossover bar is. Now this is where the adjustment point is for our torsion bar. Before you start loosening or removing this hardware, just take note of the adjustment of this. In my application, I can see a little bit of threads down here and a whole lot up along the top. Now you could make a clear marking if you have some spray paint. Just go ahead and make a quick coating there so you know exactly where this needs to go. Now we'll continue on with our torsion bar release tool. For this, it's going to go up and over the top of the crossover bar. There's a small groove. And if you were to look at this area, you're going to find that it has a small divot for the other end to slide into. We'll get this aligned and start applying pressure. Let's get our torsion bar tool in place. We need to make sure that the upper portion is properly set so this does not slide. We're also paying attention down along the bottom area. This needs to slide into its proper divot. We're going to start applying pressure here. When we do this, it's going to start pivoting the torsion bar cam upward. We should be able to remove the hardware from down in this area next. Now we do have movement from this area. We'll be using an 18mm to remove this bolt. Careful for any pinch points here. There's our bolt. You can reach in here, slide that out of there. A thorough inspection of each piece of hardware. At this point, we can release pressure from this area. Now that we have the tool out of the way, we want to make sure we put something underneath this area. When we do start driving the torsion bar out, we want to make sure that the torsion bar cam does not fall down and potentially hurt us. So I'm just going to use a chunk of wood and a small jack here. Okay, so now we can start using our air hammer, or you can use a hammer and chisel in this area. We need to cause some vibration. We're driving the entire torsion bar straight forward, out through that front control arm. Now it's common to find that the torsion bar is stuck in the keyway along the rear adjustment point. Now if this is the case, make your way up towards the front control arm. We're going to be focusing in this area. We could try to dislodge the control arm and try to drive the control arm forward and away from our torsion bar. Now for the hardware for this upper control arm, you're going to be using an 18mm for your bolt head and a 24mm for the mounting nut. There's our mounting nut. Now I'm going to leave this bolt temporarily in place. It can move as it needs to, but let's make our way to the rear hardware next. Now, of course, you will also have a washer along each side here. To continue removing the mounting bolts, you can either tap them out of position with a hammer and punch, or you can continue on unscrewing them, and typically they will make their way out. I'm just going to use a hammer and a punch. There's that mounting bolt. Now, since this control arm is fairly heavy, I'm just going to leave the tip of the bolt in slightly. Let's make our way to the next mounting bolt. We'll fully remove this. There's our forward mounting bolt. Now, obviously, this entire thing is going to be fairly heavy overall. Let's continue on to removing that rearward mounting bolt. We're going to carefully start pulling this down or out, whichever way is easiest for you. After that, we'll start driving this control arm out and away from our torsion bar. Now, while we start tapping this out of position, we want to be aware of the fact, as I mentioned, that this is extremely heavy and it can be awkward to try to hold. Once it does start breaking free, you want to try to hold onto the control arm, and we'll continue on wiggling it out of position. For now, I'm just continuing with my hammer. Now, with this in the lowered position, we can gain access along the lower portion of the control arm, around the side, and up along the top. We're going to try to apply heat. The heat is going to make this expand, and it should allow the torsion bar to release. Now, this is extremely common. The torsion bar will not come off of my lower control arm. Now, if this is the case for you, you may find that you have to cut the control arm in some way. One thing I'd mention about that is however you cut it, just make sure you do not cause any damage to the torsion bar. Now, as you can tell, we did make our slit on the control arm. I've used penetrant, I've let it sit. Now, at this point, I'm going to start tapping the control arm in one direction and the other. What I'm trying to do here is pull it right off of that torsion bar. There it is, friend. Prior to installation of any brand new part, of course, we want to make sure we clean and inspect our mounting areas. As far as on our vehicle, we still have our torsion bar in place. So we need to make sure we clean along this end of the torsion bar for when we slide the control arm into the proper placement. We also want to make sure we clean along the frame of the vehicle where our control arm will mount. Let's start with that torsion bar. We'll just make sure nothing's rotted or weak here. This looks good. Wire brush for inside the frame area. Now, since we don't want to have to struggle with the removal process in the future, we'll use some anti-seize right along the very end here. Okay, friend, let's get ready to install our brand new front lower control arm. When we go to install this, we want to make sure we know exactly where the marking is that we had made during the removal process. We need to have this in the same orientation in the brand new control arm. Now, as I bring this up, I'm attempting to align it, and I'm sliding it straight rearward. There we are. Now we can continue on lining up the control arm with the frame itself. We're going to start in both of our mounting bolts. Now, I can't push this one all the way through yet because I still have to align the forward portion. It's down at an angle here. Now, if you can't press it in by hand, you could lightly tap it in using a rubber mallet. Now that we have both of those started in position, the next thing we have to do is raise the lower control arm to the original ride height position. Now for this, you can either use a jack or you can just bring it up to where the lower portion of your front shock is. After you have that in place, continue on with the mounting bolts. We're just going to slide that straight on through. Now I have this control arm in the proper placement. We're going to snug each one of the bolts and then we're torquing them to 129 foot-pounds. Let's do the same to the forward mounting bolt next. Let's follow the torsion bar all the way to the rearward mounting point. Now in this area we have to get this secured as well, so we have our torsion bar tool. Of course we're going to set this up. The end of the torsion bar tool is going to go into here, and of course the upper portion goes up along the top. We'll start applying pressure, and then we have to continue on with the rest of our apparatus. So for this, I'm just going to bring my tool into place. We'll make sure it is properly inside of the groove up along the top so it does not slide around. Now let's just start applying pressure. We can see that this cam is lifting up as it should. With that in the upright position, let's focus on this piece. You can see that we do have two small grooves. That's going to sit in the crossover bar. Once you have that properly seated on the grooves, we have the mounting bolt. I like to use some anti-seize. Go ahead and start this in by hand. Now that I have light pressure on this, I can remove my tool and we'll continue on bringing this up to the original positioning. Now as I look deep inside this area, I can see that the tip of the bolt is properly seated in the cam. Let's continue on snugging this up. We're making our adjustment. There we are. Now this is approximately where my alignment was adjusted to. Of course, the alignment professional will make any adjustments as needed. Now we're done back here, let's make our way back to the front. Back at the front suspension, we're going to be tightening our hardware, holding our lower shock to the lower control arm. For this, we're going to have a jack underneath the lower control arm. We'll bring this up to the original ride height position, continue on with the mounting hardware. So I'm just going to start this on. Now I'll jack this up. Once it's in the proper position, we'll snug it and torque it to 59 foot-pounds. Go ahead and release pressure from under the lower control arm. Prior to installing the axle, let's make sure we clean and inspect the flange here. Okay, this is looking pretty good. I just want to try to get inside the inner circle as well. Looks like we have a nice smooth surface here. Let's pay attention to the axle next. Now we can see the flange on the axle here. Let's clean this down as well. We'll apply some anti-seize to the flange area. Go around the circular port edge here, and then along the outer flange as well. Now as we start bringing the axle over, I've cleaned my mounting bolts and applied blue thread locker. We're going to get this in position. Align each one of the mounting bolt ports and start in all 6 of your mounting bolts. Once they're all started in, go ahead and snug them up and torque them to 58 foot-pounds. When we snug these, we want to go crisscross. Now when we do go to torque this, typically you're going to find that this is going to want to spin on you. There isn't much resistance here. You could try to use a pry bar in between the bolt and the axle. In common cases, you're going to find that the bar will just slide out of place. So if that is the case, you can use another 15mm socket on one of the mounting bolts. With that in place, we can continue on with a pry bar, preventing the axle from turning, and we'll continue on torquing the mounting bolts. There's one. Let's see if we can get this one while we're here. There's that too. Our last two bolts. Okay, that's all 6 of them. Double check, make sure it looks like it's seated all the way around. This is perfect. Now let's install the sway bar link. As far as the front sway bar link, we want to make sure that we have the bolt portion of it. We have one of our concave washers, and then we have one of our rubber bushings. The bushing itself is going to have the small nub facing up towards the control arm as we make our way from the bottom. Now once you have that through there, we're going to continue on with our next rubber bushing. This rubber bushing is going to have the small nub facing down towards the control arm. After that, we have a concave washer. Sliding that down on here. Small spacer. We'll slide the bolt up and through. Continuing on, you're going to have to install another one of your concave washers. Another bushing. We have the small tab facing upward towards where our sway bar is. Now we're going to have to flex things as necessary so we can swing this under the sway bar. We'll continue on with our next bushing, another washer, and then of course our mounting nut along the top. We got our rubber bushing, washer. To install the upper mounting nut, you may find that you have to apply upward pressure from underneath the front sway bar link, bringing it up through that control arm. It's going to gently squeeze on the bushing. It should give you an area on the top of the sway bar link to install the mounting nut. Now that I have that on there, we can remove the jack from under here. Continuing on, we can start tightening our sway bar link. When we tighten this, we want to make sure that we're snugging it to the point that we can see each one of our rubber bushings are lightly squeezing. We don't want to crush them down like a pancake and have something flat. We just want to make sure that each one of the rubber portions is touching up against metal as it needs to. I'm just going to hold the top, and I'll start turning the bottom of this, and we're paying attention up along the top for the threaded portion here, and of course each one of those bushings. Now, as I mentioned, the sway bar link itself does not necessarily have a torque spec. We just need to make sure that the bushings are properly seated. Now, before we get the knuckle in place, let's make sure we clean the axle. You can see that we have a splined area that slides into our wheel bearing. We'll just attempt to remove as much rust or debris from this area as possible. Just use a wire brush as necessary. We like to use some anti-seize on the splined area, not necessarily on the threaded portion though. Now, as we bring the knuckle up, we're going to have to do several things at once. We want to make sure that the wheel bearing's sliding over the axle, but as we do that, we want to have it in an area that we can have it loose, swing the lower portion underneath the ball joint stud, lift it all up, hold it in position while we start on that ball joint nut. At this point, we'll make sure we have our upper ball joint mounting nut. We're going to bring the knuckle, we're swinging it up into position. As we bring it up, we need to make sure the axle is going into the backside of the wheel bearing. It's going to protrude out through the outer portion. We'll start on our upper ball joint mounting nut once we have it in place. Now you may find that you have to lightly pry down on your upper control arm to get it in position. We've got our mounting nut on there. Now, to tighten the upper ball joint nut, you're going to find that the ball joint stud spins while you tighten the mounting nut. So we're using a pry bar to apply downward pressure on our ball joint, driving that stud down and into our knuckle. Now we're going to torque that to 37 foot-pounds. To torque this, I want to help prevent this from spinning, so I'm just using an angled awl inside of my caliper bracket port on my steering knuckle. That's going to hold this for me. 37 foot-pounds is what we're torquing that mounting nut to. This is good. Let's make our way to the lower ball joint next. Now, as for torquing the lower ball joint mounting nut, since this does not have a captured washer on the mounting nut, we're torquing this to 37 foot-pounds. Once it's torqued, we have to make sure we continue turning an additional 130 degrees. Now, since our ball joint has a slotted mounting nut, we need to install a locking cotter pin. This locking cotter pin has to go through the slots on the nut, but it also needs to be aligned with the port on the ball joint stud itself. Now, if you cannot slide this through because it's not aligned, you need to continue tightening the mounting nut just enough that you can install the cotter pin into the next available slot. Ours is aligned. That works out well. We'll make sure we peen that over so there's no way this nut can loosen up on us while we're driving down the road. Let's align our outer tie rod end with the steering knuckle next. Slide that straight up and through. We have our mounting nut. As for that, start it in, snug it up. The torque for that will be 44 foot-pounds. Before we install our brake rotor, let's make sure we clean our hub mating surface. You can use a wire brush if necessary. We'll use some copper anti-seize on the hub mating surface. Now it's time for the brake rotor. To hold this in position, I'm using my axle nut as a spacer and my lug nut to hold it on there. Before we bring the caliper into position, let's make sure we have the ABS wheel speed sensor wire in the proper positioning. We don't want it down here where it could get damaged by our caliper. We're going to bring it right up along the top of this area, just behind the backing plate. We'll rest it in this area. Continue on with your caliper. As for that caliper, we're going to bring it over the brake rotor. We'll slide it into place, start in each one of our two mounting bolts. Now, before I get my bolts in place, let's just have a quick look at our brake flex hose. What we're paying attention to is to confirm it's not twisted in some way that might restrict the brake fluid flow. This could happen if you are bringing the caliper over and you turned it in some way. Now it's time for our two caliper bracket mounting bolts. I've cleaned the threads. Let's continue on with installing these. We're going to torque them to 229 foot-pounds. With the caliper in position, the brake rotor can't go anywhere. We can remove the lug nut and our spacer. Let's pay attention to our brake flex hose next. Up along the top of the steering knuckle, you can tell that the brake flex hose bracket has a small alignment tab, and then of course we have a port on the knuckle and on that bracket for our mounting bolt. We'll just start in our mounting bolt and snug it up. It's time to secure that ABS wire next. We'll slide that into its locking clip. Make our way over here now. You can see exactly where it needs to fit into. Press that in. Let's make our way up and behind here next. As we make our way under here, there's going to be two mounting points for our ABS wire. You'll find that you have a small circular port here. That's for the first mounting point. It's just going to line up and slide right in. There we are. The next mounting point is going to be right up along the top. Obviously, from under here, it's fairly difficult to see. Generally, you can just feel around. You're going to find another circular port, line it up, and press that in. Let's get this connected. Press it in, listen for a click, double check to make sure it's secured so you do not get an ABS wheel speed sensor light. It's time for the axle nut. We'll start with our washer. Start on this axle nut. I'm going to use a pry bar. We'll come across the studs down towards the ground at an angle. That's going to prevent this from turning on us. Now when we tighten this axle nut, we have to do it by hand. You don't want to use an impact tool, which could cause damage to the bearing. We'll snug this up and then we'll torque it. I have it bottomed out, so I'm going to torque this to 188 foot-pounds. Once you have that axle nut torqued to specification, it's time for the protective cover. We'll tap this in place using a rubber mallet. Double check to make sure it's sealed all the way around. Now one last quick inspection in this area and we can reinstall our wheel. Now it's time to reinstall that wheel. Once you have the wheel in place, start on all 8 of your 22mm lug nuts. We're going to lightly bottom them out. We'll get the wheel safely back down on the ground and then torque each of them to 140 foot-pounds. Now I've got the wheel back on the ground. Let's go ahead and torque each of these lug nuts to 140 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. If you have a center cover, install that now. We'll get this in place. We're using our 22mm socket to lightly bottom these out. Double check to make sure it's secured in place. Okay friend, we finished our installation. Now the next thing you want to do is take your vehicle for a road test. Make sure you have no ABS light and get yourself a 4-wheel alignment. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.